Isn't it funny how we were just talking about LA and you growing up, your dream was to be in Silicon Valley. And then you get to Silicon Valley and then all of a sudden you just can't wait to not be in Silicon Valley over time.
Yep.
Isn't that funny how life works that way? Not just necessarily where you live, but generally speaking.
Yeah, I would say, well, look, I'm very grateful to the place, it's just like, but I used to sell like, hey, I never want to sell Brex except if I have to be in here in San Francisco my whole life, that would be the the only reason I do it.
Isn't it weird? Like, I bet when you were a kid, and when I say kid, like in your teens, you probably thought, boy, if I had this type of company, right? If I could get out of Brazil and do this thing, then this. And I bet that feeling just kind of never really ends, does it? Like this feeling of, the way that I describe it is a little bit of dissatisfaction. Maybe that's how I always feel, so I'm just projecting it on you, but kind of living in the gray area between your current state and your desired future state. I don't know, your LA comment made me think of that.
You know that, like, I think I used to think that way, and I would say that 2022 is when I saw change a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know if it's a combination of COVID or, or the macro or whatever it was that, like or therapy, whatever it was, that like I kind of internalized the fact that, look, if I want to get to a desired outcome, I just need to do the inputs right every day. And so I just like focus on that so much, because otherwise it's just so anxiety generating, right? Like, are we going to get out of this macro environment? What is going to happen? What's inflation? COVID was the same thing. Like, what's going to happen with the world?
Yeah.
And, and then I think that there's this book, Atomic Habits, that's really good that, talks about this. But like, hey, what are the habits that you need to have to make sure that if you do it every day, you're going to get to the outcome that you want? And I just spend probably most of my energy now thinking about my day and thinking, okay, will I get to do the things that I want to do today that will lead me to the outcome of the future?
On the therapy piece, do you find that therapy gives you something that a professional coach does not?
Yeah, I think that like when I'm with a coach, and we had great coaches, it's very much about the way that work impacts me. I think with therapy, you go more into the personal stuff, and then you kind of figure out that things are intertwined more. So I did think it helped me in a different way. And I think with a coach, we spend a lot of time, at least with our coaches, talking about specific organizational challenges or how to do feedback or how I was feeling about this or that. Versus in therapy, you actually do go into, your childhood stuff and all that stuff.
I do think, though, that the childhood stuff is deeply intertwined in the way that you build the company.
100%.
No?
Yeah.
Did it take you a while to figure that out?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Can you tell me about what Ask Me Out is?
Yeah. So basically, like when I was, I think I was 15 or 16, I had a big fight with my mom because she was not into, I was trying to build companies and go to school in the US, and she's a labor judge in Brazil. So if you can imagine,
She's a labor judge in Brazil?
Yeah, she's a labor judge. So if you can imagine, not super pro entrepreneurship, she was more on the union side, let's put it like that. And so, at some point, she got and had a conversation with me that was, Henrique, like, if you're adult enough to make your own decisions, you need to go support yourself. So I got emancipated and I kind of moved out and started supporting myself, and I was running out of money. And because I had made some money in the past through some gaming stuff. And I saw this hackathon in Miami that was worth $50,000. And I was like, wow, if I can win this thing, is more time supporting myself, right? So, okay, I'm going to bet a bunch on winning this hackathon. So I went with two friends, and I had this friend of mine who was at MIT at the time, and he had a crush on this girl that was his neighbor, but he was a super shy guy. So he didn't want her to know that he had a crush. Instead, she had a crush back, which she didn't. And so we had this idea, okay, let's build an app that you can like people that right, from Facebook friends, and if they like you back, you both know. And we did that in that hackathon, as you can imagine, not super hard to build when Facebook APIs allow you to do this. and we won the hackathon. So that was the story.
And that was your first company, technically?
Technically, that was the second trial of a company. Yeah, I had tried one before that failed.
What was conversation like for you at the dinner table growing up in Brazil? Was it a nice area? Was it a shitty area? Was it just your mom? Was it more than that? Who else was there?
Yeah, it was my mom, my dad, and my brother.
Yeah.
I would say that conversation when I was growing up was very much about kind of like school and normal stuff. And I had
like achievement stuff?
No, just more like my mom was a labor judge, right? So she, as a judge, like a big part of she's like analyzing people. She needs to tell if like someone's lying, not lying, what he thinks. So I think like we talked a lot about what happened in school and like analyzing the situation, which I think was actually really good for me in that respect. So that was a lot of it, and then just activities, and it was pretty chill. My dad was there too, but my mom was the breadwinner, so she like told everyone what's up.
You still stay close with your mom now?
Yeah, I would say we had a falling down around that time, so we didn't talk much for a few years, and then I would say we started getting closer maybe 2 years ago, and pretty close now.
And was that falling out? And do you mind if I ask about this?
No,
was the falling out a function of you being frustrated that she couldn't understand this itch for entrepreneurship, for lack of a better word? This was the career path that you wanted that she didn't understand.
Well, the lack of understanding was annoying, but then the like, I'm not going to pay any of your bills. You need to move out of the house and do your own thing. That was a bit much in my view. So.
Yeah. Unless you get a like traditional job type thing.
And no. If I wanted to, just go to school and get a traditional job and do kind of like the traditional path, then it's fine. But if I wanted to go do this crazy stuff, then it needs to be my own dime.
Yeah. And at what point did you feel like she maybe the framing of it wasn't crazy stuff anymore? Was it when you made it to Stanford? Like at what point did, in her eyes, you feel like, okay, maybe this is my path?
I think when we sold my first company, that like actual dollars came in.
Yeah. And that was Pagarme?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that company?
Yeah, it was kind of like the Stripe of Brazil. It's probably the easiest.
How old were you when you started it?
That was like maybe 3 months after Ask Me Out. So this was like maybe 16 to 17.
Okay.
And that worked really well. I think it was like probably similar to why Stripe worked here. Very, kind of easy integrated APIs for businesses to accept payments. And then we did really well because, this is very technical, but in Brazil, like there's like all these marketplaces coming up, kind of like here. But the thing is, like the tax law there said that if you have a marketplace and the GMV of marketplaces are taxable. So if a marketplace received the total, like let's say it's Uber, and the Uber received the money first from the transaction, they would have to pay taxes on top of it. So we had this technology in which we could split that transaction to pay, for example, if Uber were a customer, we had a competitor that was a customer, we would pay the driver sum and then the platform sum, and then the platform never touched the money. Then that would be, they would only pay taxes in their own stream, and no one else was doing that. So that actually grew a lot.
And when you say grew a lot, can you contextualize that?
Yeah. So, we only raised $300,000 because, that's what people were willing to give us at 16. And then we got to like $1.5 billion in transaction volume, like in TPV, like tens of millions in revenue. It was very profitable. So it was a good company.
And who's we?
Me and Pedro, my co-founder, the same co-founder is here.
And who's Pedro?
So Pedro is my co-founder. He
across several companies.
Across these two companies, yeah.
Across Pagarme and then now Brex.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. And I would say that, we've been working together since then. Now it's going to be like 12 years now.
Yeah. And how'd you meet him?
We met over Twitter. So basically, Pedro was very hacker famous worldwide, actually, because when he started coding when he was 9. When he was 12, he found the first jailbreak for the iPhone 3G in the world. And then that was all over the news because usually these things come out of China or Russia or something. And it was all over the news. And then he got very hacker famous. And then I reached out to him on Twitter and we started fighting text editors, Vim versus Emacs. It got too complicated to fight over 140 characters. We went to Skype. On Skype, we became best friends and decided to, start programming together.
Man, that is a nerdy story.
I know.
And is Is it public? Did you sell Pagarme?
Yeah.
Are the numbers public? Like, was it good? How big did the company get in terms of people?
Yeah, it was 100. I would say that like, it was a big company with not as big as acquisition as it should.
Yeah.
I think it sold for like 5 times profit.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is, if it was these days, it would sell a lot more.
Yeah. Or a year ago, a little bit more than that.
Yeah. A little bit more than that. But at the time, like there's a lot of other reasons why that happened, but the company today is a big company. So like the company who bought it is this company called Stone.
Yeah.
It's like a big company, public company in the US, a big company, and their entire online arm is Pagarme, and I don't know if they break down the numbers, but it's very big now in Brazil.
And the company got to 110, 120 people. You're like 16, 17?
Well, it took 3 years, right? So maybe I was like 20 by that time.
Yeah. Is that awkward? Like, did you have deep imposter syndrome?
No, man. I had an ego the size of like
no kidding.
Manhattan skyscraper.
You thought you were entitled to it?
Yeah, 100%.
No way.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, I think like...
That's different than normal, Yeah,
I think so. I probably had like a bigger ego then than now.
Manhattan.
Yeah. I think it's because, so when I started my first company, I was like 14 or 15. Mm-hmm. And I was in the press a lot when that happened. And press is a weird thing. Maybe in the US they're more used to it, but like it's like this massive validation to everyone around you that what you're doing is kind of serious. So I had like journalists calling me like the next Mark Zuckerberg and the genius prodigy of Brazil.
And you bought into the hype
when I was 15, and I totally believed them.
Yeah.
Like I was so like, oh yeah, that's what I am.
Yeah.
And then I had a lot of ups and downs since then. But I would say that at that point, I'm like, yeah, fuck yeah, I'm like awesome. But so
yeah. And your co-founder, was the relationship was it very clear when you decided that you were going to start a company together, the delineation of responsibilities for that company? Especially, the reason I ask is because, you have a big ego at the time. He is this incredible, already renowned coder, right? So you're both already something at a nothing age.
Yeah.
Does this question make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think that at the time, even though I had a big ego, I knew very instinctively that the only way to be very successful is by having the smartest people around me. Mm-hmm. So I was actually deferential to him more than the deference definitely spoke a lot higher than my ego.
Yeah.
And I actually like that with a lot of people that worked for us. I felt lucky that they were working for us.
And when you say successful, what did that mean to you? At like the only way for me to be successful was to get the best people. What did that mean to you at that time? Was it financial?
Yeah, I think at that time, like, kind of like proving to my mom and the world that that was a career path that was decent.
Yeah.
So, and then after we raised money is like getting a good outcome for the company, right? And, having profits and all that.
Has that, and we'll get into Brex and whatever, it's a huge company now, huge in the terms of like market cap and whatever. Has that definition of success, having gone through what most would define as successful until now, changed? Meaning, I'll give you a pretty tangible example. And this is maybe too close to home, no pun intended, but Parker at Rippling talks about how his original, he's very open about this, how his original motivation for starting Rippling was really a revenge tour against a bunch of people that he thought screwed him over.
Yeah,
that was the chip
David
on his
Sachs,
shoulder.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And some other VCs. And he was very clear about that. And he says now I'm way away from that. Like, I'm not trying to prove anyone right or wrong in the same way that I was then. That's all I cared about. So I wonder, how much have you disassociated from the original thing?
Oh yeah, dude, honestly, like, if we're going to be very blunt, like, and I say this to a bunch of people, is like, your original motivation almost doesn't matter as long as you have it. And I think that, I think in VC world, a lot of people like, they try to find these like super Puritan, mission-oriented founders that their life's work is this, et cetera, et cetera. And every successful founder I know, when they started, they had like a fucked up motivation, you know? Like, and mine was like, I wanted to get rich because like I wanted to pay my bills so I don't have to go back to my mom. That was my thing, you know? I just wanted like financial independence. So I could like do whatever I wanted without having to get permission from my parents.
Yeah, I actually find that it's often motivated by something unhealthy. Like insecurity is a big one that I see. It's a pretty consistent theme of like a deep insecurity of trying to prove others or yourself that you can be something. It's not necessarily that you were born in this world with a mission in mind that you're now going to go solve. 100%. I actually think that's a little over glamorized. That happens, but I think it's the exception, not the rule.
I 100% agree. And COVID for me was actually like a super interesting year because, you know, like 2019 is a fucking awesome year for Brex. Like it was amazing. Like, you know, we started out 2019, you know, like we had just raised our $1 billion round. We grew revenue from 10 to 100 million in 1 year. Everything was amazing. We hired like a ton of people, you know, everything was going great. And then 2020 came and then like COVID hit and we were definitely not COVID beneficiaries. You know, like people were spending less on their credit cards during COVID, as you can imagine, right? T&E went to zero, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of the motivation that I had at the time was like of growth and like wanting to grow even more. And, you know, the financial kind of had to be replaced with something because that was not happening and I needed to be happy. So I needed to come to some place. And I was traveling a lot. Like I think I flew 600 hours in 2019 because we had 4 offices. I was flying between them. I was seeing customers. I was seeing investors. I was doing everything. I flew 600 hours. And 2020, like I flew a little bit, maybe like 100 hours because I was moving around a bit, but like a lot less. And I was in these places for like months in a row, right? I used to go out a lot because I was 23 and that's what 23-year-olds go. I didn't go out for like 2 years, right? So, and then that just gave me a lot of time to kind of reflect. And I would say over that period, like after COVID is when really like I kind of like got out of the financial success motivation and got into the mission orientation motivation. But it took a while, you know?
Yeah. When you sold, and I appreciate you sharing that. When you sold Pagarme and you came, what'd you do? Did you come to the States?
Yeah, I went to Stanford.
You went to Stanford.
Yeah.
You and your co-founder.
Yeah.
Together?
Together. Both of us got in.
And was like this the dream? Like, was this the Mecca? Come to Stanford?
That was the Mecca.
This was it.
That was it.
Yeah. Like part of your motivation was like, all right, if we build this company, maybe Stanford will let us in.
Yeah, kind of. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first company I started, the first one when I was 14, 15, it was the study in the US one, came from, hey, my grades are not that great, so I kind of need something else for my application. Maybe starting a company would be a good idea. Like that was literally the original thing that I thought. Yeah.
So funny. And what's even more ironic is you show up to Stanford, which is the goal. And then you dropped out like how long did it take you before you dropped out?
It was 6 months.
6 months.
Yeah.
You spend your whole life waiting to get to Stanford. And then 6 months later.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that like, all in, man, I don't like school. I never liked school.
Yeah, you and me both.
Yeah. Like I didn't like school.
Because it feels too theoretical?
A couple of things. I actually like learning. I found this out like recently, but I have pretty strong ADHD. And I never knew because like I coded since I was 12. It's like, how the fuck can I code and have ADHD, right? So like just sitting in classroom for like 2 hours listening, I could not for the life of me pay attention. And then like having to then read the books of stuff I was like not interested in, I couldn't do that for the life of me. So it was just so painful to go through school, even though I like the stuff that I was interested in, I really liked and I enjoyed, but then there's all this other stuff you have to do for school, right? Like that's nothing to do with what you're interested in.
Yeah. I say that I'm an outside cat, not an inside cat. It's hard for me to just sit inside. One of the things, Naval, you know who Naval is? Yeah. He, one of the things that was so weirdly liberating that I'd never heard of until he said it was the pressure of finishing a book. And I don't know if this has anything to do with my ADD or whatever it is. I've never obviously been prescribed for it, but I definitely have a hard time sitting there doing anything for long periods of time. And when he said, hey, you don't have to finish a book you don't like you can just put it down. I realized that it's very selective. If I'm like into something, I can sit there forever. Probably not too dissimilar from coding. But if it's something that you even acutely don't understand why you're doing it, school being a good example, there's not a chance.
Exactly. And look, what then happened, and I don't think I ever shared this in a podcast, but I'll share it here because you're good at interviewing. But so, and after a while, I was diagnosed and I got medicated, and I took Adderall for like 6 months. And dude, like for the first while, it felt like a superpower. Yeah. I had barely read any books in my life. I read 17 books in 4 months, like finished book to cover, 17. And I felt it was this like massive superpower, you know, like, oh my God, how can I live with this? Like, how could I survive without this? But then what I realized is that a lot of the superpowers that had gotten me so far here was this fact that not spending time on things that I'm not supposed, that I didn't want to, made me focus on only the most important things. So even though that like I got some new superpowers, I kind of lost my original superpowers, you know? That, or for example, if I was connecting and talking to someone or selling someone, when I was on Adderall, my head was like thinking about 5 different things I had to do that same day because I wanted to do work. When I was me, I was like fully present and thinking about that conversation and like getting that. So I stopped, and I kind of like the conclusion that I got is, you know, a lot of what got me to where I am today is because of my deficiencies and not, you know, in spite of them, I guess.
Yeah, that's an interesting framing. Meaning, one interpretation of that could be because let's use impatience as one derivative of what we're talking about. Like, I guess impatience can be a very negative thing, but impatience can also be positive applied to the right things.
Exactly. And the thing about being a CEO is that, you know, and this is sometimes people ask me, oh, what's the best advice I ever got from someone? And I was lucky, like I got introduced to Evan Spiegel in 2016 and from Snap. And, you know, he gave me probably one of the best advice I ever got, which is the cool thing about being CEO is, you know, the best CEOs are extremely authentic to themselves. You can build the entire company, the entire organization around you. If you try to emulate being Elon Musk and you're not like that, you're just going to fail. So the only way that you succeed is to be 120% version of you and kind of build around it. So I think that's kind of has to do with it, right? Like if I know that I'm impatient, I know the settings in which I'm useful, but I also know the settings in which I'm not helpful. So I don't participate in those. And I focus on participating on the settings in which I'm useful, right? So I think as CEOs, you actually do have the power to build a company in a way that fits you really well and like leverages your superpowers, and you hire people to complement you on the things that you don't have. And I would say the advantage that I have is like Pedro is the complete opposite of ADD. He can like redo whatever it needs for as long as it needs for like 14 hours in a row, no matter what it is. And he's super smart, you know, so we complement each other really well in that respect.
You know what my hunch is? I think that people aren't, maybe let's use CEOs as an example, aren't super authentic, because if you are, and all of a sudden people start judging you, people don't like you, if it's you, all of you, meaning you don't have any coat of armor. If you try and be Elon Musk and they don't like your leadership style, you always in the back of your mind are like, well, I can just do a different leadership style. And they're still me. They're not actually attacking me. They're attacking the leader version of me. It's just actually, I think, somewhat of a defense mechanism. That's what I think. Like, I think there's a separation of your identity as a person and then as a worker or as a leader. And I think that separation of space gives people a little bit of a protective shield. But I actually think it inhibits them from being the best version of what they can be.
I think so too. And I think there's like another piece, which is, you know, what I always thought is like, you know, and now I've been public about this, the fact that like I don't, you know, I didn't enjoy reading books, and like, because like it's such a pattern for successful CEOs to read a lot, right? Like there's literally ads saying that. And so I always thought, it's like, I can't tell this to anyone, because who's going to want to work for a guy like this? Who's going to want to invest in a guy like this, you know? Because as a CEO, you're proving yourself all the time. You're selling recruits. You're selling the entire company. You're selling investors. You're selling customers. And they're, you know, especially like employees and investors, they're betting on you. So you feel like you need to be a version of you that they would buy. And how can I be a version that doesn't read? You know, like that sounds like terrible. And so I think that's the other thing is like you feel you need to fit to the mold of Silicon Valley. And if we're going to be real, Silicon Valley does have a mold, like it's not that this is like completely inaccurate, and I think Pedro and I, we benefited a lot from it in the sense of like, yeah, we are, two like Stanford dropouts that know how to code, right? Like that are, 20 and 21.
Where
like,
people took a shot on you and threw a lot of money your way.
Yeah, exactly. Like I can't think of anything more stereotypical than Silicon Valley than that, right? Like, so I definitely acknowledge that exists.
Yeah.
And, it's a thing and we definitely got leverage of it. But I also think that people who are not like that, they feel they need to somehow mold into that, which it's a thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. Can you talk about applying to a firm were you at Stanford?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so the story was...
a firm is Max Levchin's fintech company.
Yes, yes. So we knew we were going to start a company in Silicon Valley, right? Like that was already a thing. And everyone says, recruiting in Silicon Valley is impossible. We're like, okay, so like if recruiting in Silicon Valley is impossible, we should try to go through a few recruiting processes to then learn how they do it. And then when we start our own company, we can copy it. So that was the theory. So we went to the Stanford Recruiting Career Fair and talked to maybe 20 companies. 18 of those rejected us because we were freshmen. They say, we don't hire freshmen. And then the only 2 that said yes, I don't even remember what the other one was. I think it was WhatsApp and Affirm. I think those are the only 2 that that said yes. And so as we started talking to the recruiter, we went through the process. And in the end, we're like, oh, okay, like we kind of want to start our own company, et cetera. And then, but we want to meet Max. And they're like, okay. So they kind of let us meet Max. And then he's like, oh, so you guys don't want to work here? He's like, no, we want to start our own company. Okay, well, whenever you guys do, come chat with me. And and then maybe a few months later, we had the idea for Brex. We went to chat with him.
And he seated you.
Yeah.
You Trojan horsed your way in.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. And you started Brex at what, 22? This was 5 years ago?
2017. Yeah, I think 21 at the time.
Both of you?
Pedro was 20.
20.
Yeah.
So this company, for those maybe listening that don't know, it's almost weird, I got to be honest, talking about using valuations as a framing mechanism for companies today. I gotta be you
gotta pick something, right?
You gotta pick something. So I will use the valuation, which was around 12 billion at the last round. Well, you've kind of had the who's who of investors. We did the Series C. Yeah, C. 2-point-something billion, 2.2, 2.4, whatever. Came out of Y Combinator. Is where you are now weird? I'm not exactly sure how else to...
In what sense where I am as...
over the last 3 years, do you ask yourself what the fuck just happened? What the fuck just happened in this business? It went... you were building one of the hottest tech companies, riding the wave of these insane... the valuations and the money flowing in directly tailwinded your business, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Because you're corporate credit cards for startups.
100%.
So the more money startups raise, the more they'd spend on their cards originally, right? And this was the craziest years we've ever seen. And you were the direct beneficiary of that. And the business, as a function of that, was also the beneficiary of that. It went insane. And then halfway through that, COVID hits. And then a year after COVID's gone, the business is ripping even harder than it was before. And then now, you just do layoffs, right? You everybody, including you, grew too quickly. We thought this was going to be a forever tailwind, basically. Yeah. Turns out it wasn't. Valuations have completely changed. Public markets, Snowflake's trading at 12x revenue, best case. The world changed fast, many times over in several years. I just wonder, I just want your reflection on that. That's my really long-winded question.
Yeah. This is my... So look, I think Brex, we did a lot of stuff right until 2019.
When you went from 10 to 100?
Yeah. And then we fucked up a bunch of stuff from 19 till mid 21. And I think we're doing a lot of stuff right from mid 21 till 22. And I think that a lot of the success, the so strong product market fit that we had in our first product made so that even if we were fucking up a bunch of other stuff, it still worked. And I think that's hard to see from the outside. So like sometimes I get VCs that give advice to founders about Brex, and they're like, oh, look at what Brex did. That was right. And it's like, no, that's the part we fucked up. You know, this is the other thing that was right. But that one, don't copy that part, you know? And I think that, look, we definitely got a lot of benefit from it. And I would say like the best part is like the talent. You get to hire amazing people, right? You have a great brand. You have a lot of money to pay for these people. So the talent allows you to build amazing things. But also, like, I think what happened to us a little bit was when we had such a success in our first product that we thought that everything else we ever did was going to work. So we did too many things. And we just started too many initiatives, hired too many people to do too many things. And honestly, look, we did the layoffs obviously twice now, one in COVID, one there. And obviously, like, I wish we hadn't hired that many people, but more than like how many people we hired, it was like how many different priorities we had. Because the reason we hired that many people was
to support the initiatives that you were taking.
Yeah, it was like just too many things at the same time. You know, like it was just like too many new products, too many new segments, like trying to like go everything in parallel instead of like more sequentially. And I think that now, on the other hand, even though it seems that things are harder because, you know, the markets, the valuation, etc. Look, we raised $1 billion last year. We still have most of that on our balance sheet, right? Like we have, and now all those, you know, not all of them, we laid off 11%, but like a lot of the people that we hired are now hyper-focused and building few initiatives that matter hard and matter a lot, right? Like we've never been more focused as a company. Everyone is now, you know, focused on the customer and like, because, you know, you can't focus on the stock price because who the hell knows what's going to go with that, right? So everyone is focused on building on the customer. Like we're not hiring that much, so people are not spending their whole days doing interviews. So we've never produced so much as a company as we're producing now, and that feels amazing.
In some ways, I bet it's a little bit of a burden off your shoulders, getting back to this simplicity, like this idea. I remember you were credit cards for startups. That was the pitch.
Yep.
That's it. That was on every billboard in every freaking corner of San Francisco.
Exactly.
And I bet there was some version of clarity that gave you superpowers.
You're spot on. Exactly that.
And, you know, if you listen to a lot of advice, they would say, focus on what you can focus on, nail your core, then steadily over time, continue to build out.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe that didn't apply for this business, or maybe it did, but it just happened too fast, you know?
I think that, you know, and it's hard to say, VCs do tell this to entrepreneurs, but they don't believe it, which is if you do raise money at really high prices, you have to grow from somewhere, you know? And if your core is not going to provide that in time, because IRR there's a time component to it.
Yep.
You need to branch out. So I think that was also like part of it in the sense of like, and again, thank God that our core business was really good. So even if we were, you know, these other initiatives weren't working super well, the core one was still growing a lot more than we expected.
That product market fit was so pure that it would just mask all these other things.
Yeah.
It would obfuscate what's actually happening in the business.
Yeah.
In some way.
Exactly.
Going back to, was Scale your first customer?
Yeah.
So talk to the CEO, Alex, and he was reflecting back on the time when you were earning their business. And he was saying how you would just show up, not tell him, go to their office and just talk to the office manager.
Yep.
And, you know, I go back to this beauty of simplicity. Like, that's what you were doing. You just show up and talk to the office manager. That was your customer.
Yep.
And you just listen to them and learn, you know, and you had one value prop, you had one customer, and you just go there. You just show up to their office.
Totally. Totally. And look, honestly, my job today, it looks more similar to that than it did, like last year. Because like, in September, so, we launched Empower, which is our new spend management product. And DoorDash was our first customer. Then we announced Coinbase. And we have a bunch of, that these enterprises are a little bit more annoying of letting us announce them. But we have a bunch like that are signed up and using now. And I think that the product that we built is amazing. Like, it's really, really transformational to the industry. But I think our go-to-market is not great yet. Like, we're building it and we want to scale it, but it's not where it was. So in September, I decided that I was going to be a sales rep. And I did 70 sales calls. Like, literally 70 in 1 month. In September. To figure out what is the best pitch that positions Brex the best way, that customers relate the most, that then we can go and like translate it down to all of our salespeople. And I had an amazing month. Like, I had so much fun doing it. And, and I think like after that, Pedro, my co-founder, did a similar thing with implementation. He's like, look, our product's great, but people are implementing in like some weird ways. Like, let me go and find like what's the best way to implement. So he did like, I think 30 implementations by himself, just to figure that out. And I think that level of like going to the ground and really understanding the customer is both fun, but it also like, that's how you get really good, right? Because if you have the right foundations, executives are really good at building the machineries. Like if you have the right ideas, your chief product officer, your CRO, your CFO, they can all go and scale it out and make it really good. But the going to the ground and coming up to the right ideas, that's what founders are very uniquely positioned to do.
And I think when the business goes the way that yours did, it becomes easy to get away from the ground.
Yeah, because you're just managing all the time. You're just like dealing with stuff, like.
I actually also argue that I think that's a lot of reason why founders kind of get fried, because they don't like the managing necessarily as much as they like going to the ground, understanding what's happening, and coming up with solutions based on what the market is telling them. Like, I think that's what a founder does.
Yeah, totally. And I think, look, the thing that, and then Pedro and I are very different here, but like, Pedro really loves systems building. So he really geeks out on the incentive structures and the OKRs and like how to create the right incentives and the clarity and the all hands. He loves internal comms. Like, he's never met a founder that's more obsessive with internal comms than Pedro. I love meeting with customers. I love sales. I love talking to customers all the time. I love figuring out what's wrong and how we're going to build to be different, right? Like, I love also, coming up, what's kind of the investor pitch? What's the sales pitch? What's the press pitch? Like, all these things I really enjoy, and I just do that a lot more, right? So I think like it's a little bit founder to founder what you kind of like doing, and both are important. You just need to, again, know what you're authentically and what you're good at.
I give a talk to our portfolio, and it's the quality of seven qualities of the 7 companies that I think really highly of, that each do one thing incredibly well, and then 7 qualities and characteristics of individuals at startups that I think are basically lowest common denominator. And one of the companies that I highlight is Brex. And the quality that I really admire in Brex, that I've been looking at pretty much since the early days, is that there is no recruiting fee internally. And the quality that I'm distilling down is the way that you recruit talent. Meaning, what most companies do is if I go and work for Brex and I call my buddy and my buddy comes and works for us, I'd get a $10,000 referral fee. You don't do that. And I think it's a very simple message that you're sending to the organization that's in the DNA from the company, from the beginning, right? That says, in your base salary, you are paid to recruit. We all recruit all the time. It is a part of your job. And we're not going to reward you because it's a part of your job. Like, this is part of the expectation. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think like that's part of it. And then the other part, just being super pragmatic about it, is like, look, that money is going to come out of somewhere. I'd rather just pay that to the people, Like, if you just get everything we're going to pay out on recruiting fees and you just pay to get the best people. So we always been like aggressive in comp. Like, our view on comp is, especially like leadership hiring, is like, hey, if you're good, you're worth every dollar. If you're bad, we just need to get rid of you fast, and then you'll be out of here. It's not a 20% difference in comp that's going to make or break this company, but you being really good at your job at this growth, it actually going to make or break the company in a lot of leadership roles. So we always been like, hey, let's hire the best people and then let's go from there. And if you do that and you're actually paying people really well, there's not a lot of money left for this kind of stuff, It's very we rather in general like benefits and things like that, like perks. We put most of that money back into people's comp.
And you structure comp in an interesting way. Do you still do that today?
Yeah, till this day. You can choose how much cash, how much equity you want. And Shopify launched something the other day. I was like, oh, I know where this came from. You get a TCV. So let's say your TCV is, let's say, $200,000 to make the math easy. You can pick how much cash, how much equity you want. Because I think the thing that we realized is, one, there's this kind of like myth in Silicon Valley that like, hey, if you're really hardcore, you take all equity. You don't take any cash. And if you want more cash, it means you're a mercenary, right? I think that's like the general kind of like myth in Silicon Valley. And we didn't really think that seemed to be true, because when we actually talked to the people who like took more cash, you're like, dude, I have a mortgage. What do you want me to do? I bought this house. Like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have bought it, but I did, like, you want me to sell my house? And we realized that there's like a lot more to how people picks cash comp. There's just like whatever their existing personal expenses already are. And we were companies miss out on a lot of people because they don't want to pay $30K more in cash for that role, because that person just can't, because they have kids in school, or they have a nanny, or they have a mortgage, or whatever it is. So anyway, so we had that hunch and we did it. Now, 5 years in, we looked at the data and we were like, okay, so is there any correlation between people who pick more cash and more equity? What we found is that there is some correlation with performance on the edges. So people who pick like 90% cash, which is the maximum, perform worse. People who pick the minimum equity perform better. But in the vast majority in the middle, there's absolutely no correlation, neither with retention nor with performance. So,
and the people that chose 90% equity, are they the best?
Not all of them are the best, but it's positively correlated from being really good. And I'm curious, it's more correlated with age, usually younger people.
Right, that makes sense. And I'm curious, from an absolute perspective, did more people pick more cash or more equity?
The average skews, but I think historically it's been 65-35, the average.
Towards equity?
Towards cash.
Towards cash.
Yeah.
If you were doing it all over again, would you structure it that way again?
Yes.
If you were doing all of this all over again, what would you restructure? Is there anything, like, you learned some interesting lessons from
comp, or
no, just like going through the ride.
Dude, just do less things.
Like that's the key lesson.
Yeah, I think Frank Slootman has this, which is just like, do things sequentially. Just to sequence it instead of paralyze it. I think that's the main lesson. So it's not even don't hire that many people. You can hire people as long as you feel you can do the same thing with them. Like they're actually working on the one thing that's your priority.
Yeah. Your first two hires were first two-ish were a CFO and a GC, right?
Yeah.
And the CFO that you hired was no joke.
No joke.
He was like one of the rising stars at SoFi, right?
Yeah, he's chief revenue officer there.
He's a chief revenue officer of a much bigger company than you at the time.
Well, we were pre-everything, so yeah.
Right. Your kids. How did that go down? I'm super curious. Because a lot of founders ask me, how did these guys recruit these people this early?
Yeah, so I think that like a couple of things. So one is we met him through a lawyer, funny enough, that introduced us, and we started talking about it, and I think he was definitely like, he was young, so he was like 29, even though he was like a rising star, but he was still like 29, and he was interested in doing something different, something earlier, higher upside, but didn't know exactly what. He was thinking about starting a company. I think the first thing when I tell founders is like, we actually gave him a lot of the company. I won't say here how much because, his privacy, but like any founder, when I tell them, they're like, what the fuck? You gave that to that guy? Mm-hmm. And they're like, yeah, man, like honestly, we wouldn't be here without him. So I'm super happy we did. Mm-hmm. Because look, the risk for an executive, it's like 10 times higher for them than it is for you. Like if they don't work, and let's say it's a year, yeah, maybe you lost 25% of that equity. But if they work, they're worth a lot. But if you fire them within a year, right, they've lost their job that they were before and their high position, and they have no job. They're like screwed, Like there's 10 times more risk for them than there is for you. Mm-hmm. So if you think someone is amazing, again, I'm really big on this, is like just do whatever it takes to, especially in the early stages, like to get them. And if they're bad, get rid of them fast. But if they're really good, just do whatever you can. So I think that was like one thing that like when I tell most founders, they're like surprised. The other thing is, we were always like super generous with titles. And I think that's like probably counterintuitive to what most people advise. Again, it came from our perspective, like we just need to get the best people, whatever, no matter what, right? And there's this myth in Silicon Valley. Oh, if you care about titles, you suck, like that's the myth. Again, we measure this again at Brex, like there's just no correlation of anything. Like it's just like a thing. And some people care about titles. Yeah, they do, whatever, So we just gave the fucking title. Like, I don't care. They're free, we paid them and we gave the title. And then just like alignment of values and, and then the other thing I would say is like, and then other people don't like when I say this too, but in Silicon Valley, brands do matter, like people have very little information in your startup. So like who backed you does matter. And we had great backers, right? Like we had Peter Thiel, we had Max Levchin, we had Ribbit, we had YC, we had like all these great people that understood about payments and were saying they were good. We had sold the company before. So I think we did a good job also kind of like leveraging other people's reputation to try to like build our own a little bit, which is what every founder kind of needs to do. Mm-hmm. A combination of that and just alignment of values, right timing for him. It wasn't that like he didn't want to do anything, right. In a bit of luck. So
how long did it take you to build the conviction that this was the person that you were willing to give up, I'm not going to say co-founder equity, but closer to co-founder equity than it was probably like early employee equity?
Yeah, probably took like 3-4 months.
For you both to build the conviction?
Yeah.
And was there anything that you were looking for that was uncompromising?
Yeah, I think someone who both knew what we needed to do from a high level, like good leader, good manager, good knowledge of the space, just knew what to do, but also like he was like building models on Excel himself before we even started, right? So like, and we recruit for this and execs till this day at Brex, but it's someone who can operate at all levels. I think that's what we call it. They can go all the way from strategy to doing the actual work, So
I call it dolphining, 10,000 and 1,000 feet.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like the rarest people can do that.
Exactly.
When I see them, like I tell our teams, like run as fast as you can at that person. It's just so hard to find. Yeah. They're so hard to find.
Very hard.
And they are the rarest gift to startups.
The best. And I think we've kind of intuitively knew that, and we saw that because even when we were interviewing him, he was like doing models, but also like not only that, he was very creative, like because we were doing a kind of like novel credit structure. He was like coming up with our credit algorithm before he joined, So he's like very creative at the same time.
I guess the layoffs happened and then you pivoted the business. That's partially why the layoffs happened. Is that fair?
We pivoted the business and then the layoffs happened.
Okay. Pivoted the business, and the pivot of the business, like, this is a $12 billion company pivoting. That is not typical.
Nope.
And I will say, you're getting a lot of shit for it. I think it's incredibly brave. Like, that is a very, we'll see how it plays out, but long-term orientation towards building a business. Like, most people just don't pivot at this point. They just don't. Why'd you do it?
I think a couple things. So
And can you talk about like the structure of what in the business happened?
For sure. So basically, we had our core product, corporate card for startups, right? And then we launched banking. Is mostly for startups as well, kind of like banking for startups. So both of those we're doing really well, and that's honestly till today what pays the bills. And then we try to expand from there. We had a couple options to expand, right? Like we could expand to corporate cards for startups. Now we're corporate card for e-commerce. We try to do that. Then we could do like startups are small businesses. Let's just do more small businesses. So we did that. And then we're like, okay, kind of like large businesses, what do we do? Large businesses is that. And what happened was, even though we thought we were doing three of the same thing, small businesses took such a scale that it became the entire business, because we went from onboarding, let's say, I don't know, like 700, 800 customers a month, which for startups is like a lot, to like 10,000 customers a month. And what happens when that happens is everything breaks, right? All the support breaks, all the scale, you just need to rebuild everything for that scale. So then, even though we thought we were trying three different things at the same time, we actually only did one of them because it was breaking, right? Like it was growing so fast and it kind of took priority. And then what happened was, when it got to maybe like August 21, we looked at it and said, okay, we can't do all these things at the same time. We need to pick. And then I went to Pedro and I both went to the ground to figure out. And when we got to the ground, we figured out two things. One, the small businesses that we were serving, they liked what we were doing, but what they really wanted was capital. Like what they really, really wanted was like lending. And when we went to the core startups that we were serving, they were like, guys, it's not just you in the market anymore. Now there's like 5 different people trying to do what you're doing. And if you don't build all this stuff that I need as I grow, I'm going to leave. And we found that out when we went to the ground. And we're like, okay, what do we do now? Because we raised a ton of money saying we're going to do this thing for small businesses. Mm-hmm. And, there's like 60,000 of them here already. Like six months later, right? But our best customers that are saying that if we don't build stuff for them, they'll leave. And there's 5 different new competitors. So we needed to make the hard decision. And the hard decision was, let's focus on our core customers, right? And so we basically decide, okay, like 2 things we need to do. One, we need to exit the segment because it just takes so much of our resources and effort and mind share and et cetera. And we need to pivot everything to serve our core customers as they grow. And there were 2 things that mattered for our core customers. One is, as they grew, they didn't need just cards anymore. They needed a way to control that spend, so spend management. Mm-hmm. And number 2 is they were going global. So they needed everything to work in multiple countries. And both of those were massive projects. So we did the hard call and we said, you know what? We're going to shut down these customers, and it's going to be painful, but it is what we need to do in order to serve our core customers really well as they grow and focus on that part of the business. And then what we realized when we did that is that startups, when they're early, they're actually kind of unique because there's not a lot of small businesses that have $2 million in the bank account lying around, right? Which makes for the underwriting model to be very unique. But when they grow, they're actually pretty similar to other large companies. They have finance departments, they have procurement, they have controllerships, they have all these things. So whatever we build for startups that grow could actually be applied to the entire mid-market and enterprise industry. So we decided to focus there on the core startups that we always served, plus the kind of like mid-market and enterprise industry. But then the next challenge was, okay, so we're going to build this like spend management and global thing. Like, what's different about it? Concur is there, Expensify is there, and we had some competitors doing stuff. So how is what we're doing different? And we went again to the ground, right? Because our initial intuition is like, hey, there's some competitors, they're doing some stuff. Maybe we should just copy that, right? And it was like, well, let's go talk to customers. And so we went down, and when we talked to customers, this is what they told us, which is really interesting, is we talked to like finance people and CFOs, etc. And we asked them, hey, what's your problem? Like, use Concur, like, what's your problem? Well, our problem is like, we implemented this Concur thing and people just don't do what they're supposed to do. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, we have the app for them to upload the receipts and we have the policies and we send them over email, we send them over Slack, but they just don't do what they need to do. Mm-hmm. And we're like, okay, that sounds like a pain point. So we designed Empower to be how can we get people to actually do what they need to do? And turns out, very intuitively, employees do it if it's easy, right? Like, if you make it easy for people to comply, they comply. Employees are not trying to like not comply because they're against the company. They're trying to rob the company. They're trying to comply. It's just hard. And if they don't understand if that's why that's important, right? That's like really hard. So we did things, for example, one of the main initiatives like automate receipts. Let's make sure you swipe your card, you don't ever need a receipt again, right? Like, let's say we realized that managers never looked expenses. They just clicked a button and approve everything. We're like, hey, what if we only showed you things that are out of policy? So you have 3 things to review instead of 50 things to review, right? And a lot of things like that to get them to comply with the policies that these finance people were building. And that resonated a lot with customers, because like as we started implementing it, we started seeing the like compliance rates and all of that go through the roof. And these finance people went from being the annoying, receipt chasers that are asking everyone, what is this? To like, okay, it's just the process that flows and, they reach their goals and they're kind of more the superheroes. I think like, but it just changed the business a lot because it's very much more similar to enterprise software than fintech now. But, it was hard because like it was a year until the product was ready and we were selling it and getting traction. It was just a year of, pain.
Now that it's, in your words, more of an enterprise software company than a fintech company, does that fire you up, the challenge?
It's kind of mixed. It's both because in the end,
or is it daunting?
I like the challenge. I would say like it's its own complexities. Like selling credit cards is so easy, like you just call people up and say, hey, I can give you a card with higher limits, no personal guarantee, great rewards. Most time, like, yeah, they started today. Now there's like all these like complex go-to-market issues, and implementation and contracting and customization and like all the stuff in enterprise software, which changed the business a lot, but I'm learning a lot, so I'm enjoying it.
Yeah. And did you have to do anything? Did you and I know I'm conscious of the time. Did you and Pedro have to do anything as founders to be like, all right, like we're a $12 billion company in air quotes, and we're gonna rebuild this business? Like, did you almost have to like, I don't know, go on a yoga retreat or something, like just kind of re-find the fuel to put back in the tank to get going again? Because obviously, like you have to rebuild the whole organization from the ground up.
Honestly, the urgency of it kind of like was the fuel, because like we're like, okay, like we have 1,000 people here, and like we need to be building the right stuff. We didn't even have time to think about it. I think maybe over the summer a little bit we did that, but like we just went so fast into like, okay, we need to make a decision. This decision we make, okay, what's going to be the product? What's the pain point? How do we build it? How do we align? What's the talent that we need? Who we need to hire? Who do we need to fire? Like it was just like, because we had so little time to do it. Mm-hmm. Right? Because, we had just raised money. We actually raised after this, but like we had just raised money at $12 billion and, we had a bunch of growth goals and we just needed to figure it out, right? Like we just needed to do what we needed to do. And there was not a lot of time for reflection. But what happened, as I said, is we just went to the ground very closely. Like we went to talk to customers. Like we were talking to customers many times a day for the first few months.
Yeah. Last one, you joined the Expedia board. And in the post when you announced it, you said, I promised myself I wouldn't join another board.
Yeah.
Why'd you do it? Also, cool board to be on. I mean,
yeah.
Besides the obvious of why'd you join, because it's a cool board to be on and there's cool people on the board.
Yeah. I think that there's a couple things. One is our business has to do with travel, right? Like we are selling T&E solutions in some ways to these companies, right? With corporate cards, travel is a big part of it and things like that. So I just felt that like I wanted to learn more from the business of travel. Mm-hmm. Number two is the guy who, is on the board is this guy, Barry Diller, who invited me to join. And I just think he's really good. And I wanted to learn from him. And there's other people on the board I want to learn from. And it's just such a different business. And I joined the board of Mercado Libre last year, and I learned a lot from it. And I felt that with him and this board, I had the opportunity to learn just as much. So I thought that it might be, I might give some, and it's 4 times a year. I need to go to Seattle. I'm actually going tonight to Seattle for the first one that's tomorrow.
Nice.
But also I think I can learn a lot. And I think being in a public company board also has been teaching me how it feels to be in a public company. And I think that's going to be very valuable for the time when we go public.
Yeah, totally, man. And Mercado Libre, is that like the Safeway of South America?
That's like the Amazon plus PayPal of South America.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Dude, I appreciate you. I appreciate you coming in and doing this. This was fun. I appreciate your candor. I appreciate that I didn't have to dig it out of you, and that you're just so willing to say it and be vulnerable about it. It means a lot, and I think a lot of people are going to learn from it. I wrap all these things the same way. The first, and the answer default has been for the last 3 years always yes, and it tends to not be necessarily now. But are you hiring? And if you are there any key roles that you are hiring for that you want to use this platform to shout out?
Yes, we are hiring. We are hiring in the marketing team right now.
Okay, awesome. Last one. What does the word grit mean to you?
Hustle.
I don't know. When you think of the word grit, what do you think of? What comes to mind?
I don't know, it's probably cliche, but just like finding a solution, right? Like don't taking no as an answer. Just like if something's hard, just finding a way around it, hacking your way into it, just figuring it out.
Henrique, I appreciate you, man.
Thanks so much for having me.